Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video. In this video, I'm back with another Big Brother ranking here. Again, I already did my pre-jury ranking, so here we're doing my post-jury ranking. I'll be ranking every season of the show based on the quality of the show after the jury phase had already started, which is really the bulk of a lot of Big Brother seasons, though interestingly, as we will talk about, it's also the not as good part of most Big Brother seasons, where especially on seasons with a lot of dominant gameplay, obviously this is where we get a lot of stagnation. So again, this list was interesting to put together, though I do think there is a vast difference in between the top and the bottom halves of this list. But again, like in my pre-jury ranking, I will be going through seasons 4 through 24 of the show. Again, season 1 was in a radically different format, so did not have a pre-jury post-jury, and season 2 and 3 also didn't have a pre-jury post-jury because there was no breakdown of when the jury started. So again, those won't be included here. So again, we have 21 seasons to rank here. So with that, let's start off at number 21. And I will say the bottom two on this list are the definitive bottom two. Like, these are the bottom two by a lot. These are both like really abhorrent post-juries with very little intrigue to the entirety of it. However, at number 21, I'm going to go with Big Brother 16. And the main reason for this is because this is also the longest post-jury in the history of the show. There are 11 rounds of gameplay after the jury, and it is so dreadful to watch. There is a very little going on in the game here because Derek has the game on lock. The only interesting round this entire phase of the game is the first round. It is the Jocasta boot round, where Derek and Cody flip at the very last second to take out Jocasta. But even then, when we're looking at the week as a whole, it's still a very middling week. It just has a very good outcome. Every other week is just filled with stagnation. There's really nothing going on. Where again, we get this double where Hayden and Donnie are the easy targets. Hayden goes home. The following week, Nicole is HOH, though gets dethroned by Battle of the Block and then gets taken out there. Again, like a bit of a funny circumstance, but not really fun to watch. We follow that up with Zach's eviction, which was also pretty foreshown. We get two of the most boring weeks in the history of the show back to back, where Donnie and Nicole go out, where there's really nothing going on in the game. We then get a double where Christine goes home, which again, pretty foreshown. And then we get the worst of it all is that we literally get a non-eviction round where we get the rewind button, and through that it makes that entire week pointless. And we followed it up with just Frankie going home, who was the consensus target anyway. And then we get the final 4 and final 3, where by that point it was so clear that Derek and Cody were getting to the end unfettered. And it's like, again, such a boring post-jury phase of the game. Really only one interesting week, and that was at the very, very beginning. So because that for me, it lands here at number 21. At number 20, pretty much same thing. Again, terrible post-jury phase, and that is Big Brother 22. And same thing, again, it's a complete steamroll by Cody. Not much going on here, though, again, the first week of the post-jury is the most interesting, where here we do have Danny having the HOH, and David ends up having a power that saves himself, and follow that with Davon winning the veto, and it really just forces the majority's hands to take out one of their own. Though they end up taking out Ian, which was probably not the most interesting outcome. But again, like, that was a very dynamic week. But beyond that, again, very little going on. We have Davon going home without much of a chance of staying. We have Kevin going home in what is probably one of the more boring weeks in the history of the show. We get the triple eviction, which was fun at the time, but in retrospect, it really just expedited what could have been more interesting rounds of the game, where David almost stays there, but does get voted out. And we follow that up with Danny getting blindsided, and what would have actually been better if it wasn't done in this expedited way. Following that, we just have these really boring weeks of Tyler and Memphis and Christmas going home, and we do get a fun final 3 round where Cody obviously blindsides Nicole, but really there's not much of intrigue going on this entire post-jury phase. The redeeming quality of it between this and 16 is the fact that it's shorter. So because of that, for me, it's here at number 20. Now, number 19, we're still continuing on with a more recent season of the show, and here we're going pretty recent to Big Brother 23. And BB23, again, this is a point where the Cookout had control. and really just steamrolled the rest of the game. And I will say it's a bit of a better steamroll than the previous two we already talked about, where those were steamrolls mostly because of the comp wins. This was more so a steamroll just because like no one expected the cookout was existing. So something that does sour me on this season though is the outcome, and the fact that the more likable and more active players within the cookout end up being taken out in favor of the people who didn't do as much for the cookout, where we obviously see Tiffany, Hannah, and Kylan be the first three out of the cookout. Mind you, a lot of that due to Kylan's own actions, but again, they were the three that were the most integral to getting the cookout to where they were, while seeing someone like Xavier obviously win the game, which again is a better outcome than Big D or Azah, but seeing him who was so deluded throughout a lot of the game and not even knowing what was going on in the game and being lucked out by being in the cookout, again, like it was not the most satisfying outcome for me. But again, like I think at the end of the day, again, like I still look at this in a similar light to 16 and 22. It's just that it's a much more likable group of people that are running the game, but it doesn't change the fact that there is a lot of stagnation. And I really just feel like the outcome of the season was not as strong as what it could have been, because that for me, it's here at number 19. Now we're number 18, we're moving on to a season that I know a lot of people absolutely hate. However, I will say I do think the post story of this season is the most interesting aspects of this season, and that is Big Brother 19. And straight up for me, again, like BB19, the post story, while it is a lot of Paul just dominating the game, it's also Paul dominating the game poorly, and him continuing to lose jury vote after jury vote the way that he handles it. And to see him eventually lose the game in a 5-4 vote at the very end is something that really does boost this post jury to me. Like this entire setup towards the downfall of Paul really elevates this post jury to where if it wasn't for that, it definitely would be towards the bottom with the 16 and 22s of the world. Where again, this is another one where like there's not that much interesting going on. I mean, Cody, Elena, and Mark are all very easy boots early on. We do have some fun from the Matt and Raven blindsides, so where we have Matt yelling at Jason saying, "You little punk!" And that's a really fun scene. But we then have the Jason blindside itself, which is really good. But after that, again, gameplay-wise, it's a bit more stagnant. Again, we got Raven going home. We got Alex going home, to where Paul continues to lie to her on her way out. We have kind of a boring Kevin eviction at 4, but then the entire finale is fantastic. I think it's one of the best finales in the history of the show. And again, a lot of it is just perpetuated by this downfall of Paul, which to me was really riveting TV, and that is why I have this here, not the very bottom, and here at number 18. Now, number 17, another complete steamroll of a season. We're moving on to Big Brother 12. Big Brother 12, again, does have some highs at the very beginning. I mean, when Rachel eventually goes home, that's not entirely a bad week, even though we get very predictable results. We follow that up by the Diamond Power of Veto, which Matt completely misplays. And even before that, we have Brendan as the HOH and making some questionable moves at that point. We then get Matt's actual eviction, which is a lot of fun, where the brigade ends up turning on him there. But then after that, again, it's mostly a steamroll. I mean, we get this double eviction where Brendan goes home. That's not that great. Yeah, another one of the weakest weeks in the history of Big Brother to me, where Reagan goes home, and again, there's like nothing going on across that entire week. Brittany's taken out, and that obviously leads to this interesting moment of the brigade telling her about the brigade, and that's a fun moment, but like outside that, not that much intrigue, and finale is just kind of mundane as well. So again, it's mostly a steamroll, but again, there's more of this intrigue early on, especially until the Matt eviction. That leaves it above the last few we talked about. It's here number 17. Number 16, and this is another one that is notably talked about as a pretty bad post jury, but I do feel like a lot of that just comes as a counter to the pre-jury. And also, I think people forget that the early post jury of this season is also pretty strong, and that season is obviously Big Brother 20. And again, Big Brother 20, after the first Scotty eviction, yeah, it is pretty bad. And it is what sadly knocks this season down for me on a season ranking, where again, like it is an all-time great season up until that point. And here on this ranking, again, like it is a pretty bad stretch there, where we get Fessy's eventual eviction. We get Scotty coming back to the game just to be evicted again, and that's so boring. We get Haley's eviction. We get the Brett double eviction, which could have been really great, but I think the fact that it was expedited in a double eviction was kind of a negative there. Then we get the Sam eviction, the Angela eviction, the JC eviction. All of it is so mundane because it's so obvious that Casey and Tyler are going to get the final 2 at that point. However, again, I do feel like the first 3 rounds of this post jury are really strong. I mean, I think the Bailey eviction week is an all-time great week of Big Brother. Mind you, it is one that is greatly affected by a twist, but still, to see Tyler potentially go home on Angela's HOH week would have been a lot of fun. We follow that with Haley's HOH, where Rockstar ends up going home during that, again, largely due to a twist, but again, it was still a really fun week, especially with Rockstar ended up helping Tyler in the veto, which gave him the win that sent her home. And then also we obviously have the Fessy week, where Fessy ends up taking out Scotty, which was one of his only few allies left at that point. So again, like, it is a pretty fun stretch there at the beginning, but considering the slog immediately afterwards, I still have to leave it here at number 16. Now, number 15, we're moving on to a post jury that is mostly just fine. It's not necessarily boring, and it's not really bad. It's just not super notable either, and that comes from Big Brother 4. Again, this is the earliest season that we will be talking about, and I really feel like this is a post jury that really just sums up my opinions of Big Brother 4. It's fine. Again, the first round, again, you do have Dana getting the comeuppance for her flip in the previous round. That's kind of interesting. But after that, again, not that much intrigue. Again, you have Nathan going home. That was kind of foreshown. Justin going home is kind of foreshown. The Jack eviction is a bit better, but then the G eviction's foreshown. You have the Erica eviction, which is fine. And again, you have Alcid and June take it themselves to the end, which I think is probably the best outcome for the season. But again, the path there is just kind of middling. It's fine. Like, there is a lot of back and forth, but it isn't really that fun back and forth. Like, it's, again, a group of, like, mostly unlikable people, so I feel like there's no real reaction when, like, one side takes power and takes out the other side, and then the other side flips back and takes out a member of the other side. Like, it really doesn't matter, because who really cares about a lot of these people? But again, like, at the end of the day, it's a solid post jury. It's just that I think in the grand scheme of things, it's tough to really place it above a lot of the other ones that we'll be talking about. So it's here number 15. Now 14, a very similar post jury, but just from a better season, and that is from Big Brother 6. I mentioned this in my pre-jury ranking. Again, I think that most of the truly great moments within Big Brother 6 happen in the pre-jury. I do think the post-jury is good, but not nearly as strong. Now, I do think, again, we start off pretty strong, where we get the repercussions of the Kaysar eviction, where Jennifer ends up going home. But after that, again, like, it's a lot of back and forth, but really not that much gameplay truly going on. It's simply the Sovereigns at one point winning HOH. They take out a member of the Friendship. Friendship wins HOH. They take out a member of the Sovereign. And really, there's not much strategizing going on along the way. Now, we do have them kind of hold off a bit when they take off James at the final 7. But beyond that, it's really just a season determined by whoever's winning the HOH comps, which is just not as interesting to me. And again, we do have a great cast here and a lot of interesting dynamics going on here, but in terms of the actual game, the game is mostly mundane across the back half of this season. But again, like, obviously the story of Janelle is really great to see. You have Yvette and her downfall is really interesting here. I mean, again, overall for me, it's just a slightly better version of Big Brother 4's post jury. They're mostly around the same, but it's just a better season, so we do have it here at number 14. At number 13, we're sticking with old school seasons, and here we do have Big Brother 5. Now, I think Big Brother 5 is slightly different than the last two we talked about, because I do think there are two pretty good weeks along the way in Big Brother 5. Again, you do have the Will eviction, which is a pretty big vote there that greatly shakes up the game. And then also you have the final 5 round, which is an all-time great week where Diane decides to flip on Nokomis and Karen and side with Drew and Cowboy. And we have them orchestrating this plot to throw the veto to Diane, and that's all really great TV there. However, the rest is kind of just fine. I mean, we do have the Adria and Natalie boots back to back, which is just not that interesting. The Marvin eviction's also one that's just kind of fine. You have final 4 round, which is like interesting in the sense that Cowboy obviously votes off his half sister, but outside of that, not that much going on there. But we do get a great final 3 round where Drew does cut Diane to keep Cowboy. But I mean, again, like, as a whole, it's definitely better than seasons 4 and 6 with these bigger moments. However, I do think the lows are much lower. Again, that 2-week stretch of Natalie and Adria going home is just so boring. So again, at the end of the day, I do think it lands around the same spot here at number 13. Now, number 12, we're moving on to the most recent season left on the board, and here we do have Big Brother 24. And BB24 for me is a tough one to rank here because, again, like I mentioned this in my Big Brother 24 review, that Big Brother 24 is a season where there is constantly things going on. There is never a completely dull week of the show. However, when BB24 was airing, I largely struggled to care for a lot of it, and also a lot of it just has this kind of like icky feeling to it as well. We do start off with the Indy eviction week, which is where we get Joseph wanting to backdoor himself, but outside that, again, a mostly mundane week gameplay-wise, outside of the fracturing within the leftovers, which that's really the only thing keeping this week super notable in the grand scheme of things. But following that, we have the split house, which again, like half the house was really boring. The Jasmine boot was pretty foreshown. The other side was really interesting, but again, it just had this like icky feeling around it where Kyle obviously exposes the leftovers, and that should have been an all-time great week there, but considering the toxicity of what was going on online and also the treatment of Joseph, it's like it really ends up becoming a sour note for me, and then falling out with the Kyle eviction, which again, like on paper should be this like big gameplay moment of taking out probably the most influential person in the game up until that point, but the way he's taken out here is, again, extremely icky, both from the comments that he said, but also the weaponizing of those. So it's like, that's not even that great. We follow that with the Terrence eviction, which is pretty mundane, though along the way, again, like we have some intrigue from Brittany trying to blow things up and trying to save Michael, and that's kind of interesting, but the actual vote itself wasn't that interesting. And then we get the Michael eviction, which again, incredible double eviction there. And we follow that with the final 5 round, which was also really interesting, where Brittany decides to flip on Taylor, though it doesn't go through. But really, it's like, at that point, it was so foreshown that Taylor and Monty were going to be final 2. Toward the next following rounds were just really boring. I mean, the Brittany eviction week, and it being an entire week was so dreadful. And really, through a lot of this, we also have Taylor being treated terribly once again from the likes of Monty. That really soured me on this as well. And obviously, like through all this, we have the redeeming factor of Taylor eventually winning the game and it being an incredible story. But I feel like the week to week on this season, it's like, while there are interesting things going on, it also has a lot of negativity surrounding it that makes me struggle with putting it too high. And considering the fact that, again, there is a lot of things going on, and the fact that Taylor's win kind of negates some of the negativity, it is enough to land it here number 12. Now, number 11, we're moving on to a post jury that, again, like I feel like this season as a whole is very strong, but I think when you look at it in its pieces, it's not as strong. And at number 11, we do have Big Brother 7, Big Brother All-Stars. And again, like it is a solid post jury. Again, a lot of that coming down to how Chilltown navigated through the game and also this underdog story for Janelle. I think in comparison to the other seasons, it's not as strong for me. I do think it's largely lacking this like big iconic round of gameplay, which I think all of the top 10 here do have. Or again, like, I mean, you do have like the Will eviction, which is a big moment. You have Danielle Reyes going home. You have the Howie blindside. But like none of those are like truly elite weeks of Big Brother for me. And like, yeah, you have other weeks that, again, like the Marcellus boot where like Will convinces Janelle to essentially get rid of one of her closer allies. That's fun. James gets blindsided by Chilltown. That's pretty good too. But for me, again, like it doesn't really reach the all-time highs that some of these other seasons do. It's simply a very good, consistent post jury, but in comparison to all these others that we'll be talking about, they are also that, plus also having at least one all-time great week, and because that for me, Big Brother 7 gets left behind here at number 11. Now number 10, we're moving a season forward, and here we have Big Brother 8. And again, like Big Brother 8, Big Brother 7, I think they're around the same spot. I will say that again, Big Brother 8 has an all-time great week at the final 9, where Dick ends up winning the veto and saving Danielle, only to then get saved by America's player. And again, like as BSy as that is from a gameplay perspective, it does make for fantastic TV, especially with Dustin getting blindsided in that position. And really from that point forward, it's a solid season. Like again, like there's not really a slow point, but there's not really a major high point either. Again, you have Jen getting blindsided by Danielle. You have, I mean, the Amber eviction is like a bit slower, though even then, like Eric won the veto and wanted to use it, but couldn't because production wouldn't let him. You then have Dick and Danielle flipping on Jessica and follow that up by Eric's boot in the double eviction. The final 4 round even was kind of interesting, where Dick and Danielle were now playing from the bottom and won the veto to save themselves. Then we have Dick winning final HOH and voting out Zach, and it ends up being a really great story. And while Dick himself is someone that isn't likable at all in the modern day, I do feel like this is still a very good story for the show. And again, like it is a pretty consistent post-jury phase with a really strong final 9 round, and that's enough for it to land here at number 10. Now, number 9, similar thing, but I do think there are higher highs in this one. And again, this is from a season that is mostly disliked by a lot of the fan base. But at number 9, I do have Big Brother 9. And for me, the early jury phase of this game is my favorite part of this entire season. These 2 final 9 rounds back to back are 2 of the best weeks in the history of Big Brother. You do have the Ryan HOH, where for a lot of the week he had been planning on backdooring Maddie. However, he ends up being convinced out of it, instead backdoors James, blindsiding half the house, only for James to get evicted and come back into the game the following round, win HOH, and initially target Ryan, only for him to then backdoor Maddie, which ends up being 2 really insane weeks back to back. Now after that, there's a bit of stagnation where Team Christ ends up winning a whole bunch of comps and takes out pretty much all their opposition. Though even along the way, again, there is some intrigue, and Chelsea's boot is pretty interesting with her wreaking havoc on her way out. You do have the James eviction, which does have some intrigue from Adam leaving him off the block initially. You then have the Natalie eviction, which is really strong, where Natalie gets caught playing both sides. Again, there is some pretty strong stuff along the way. Though again, like in comparison to 7 and 8, I think it's in the same ballpark. I think those first 2 weeks of the post jury, those 2 final 9 rounds back to back, are all-time great rounds that leave it above them at number 9 here. At number 8, we're moving on to a post jury that has some really all-time great rounds of gameplay, but also has a bit of a lull in the middle that keeps it out of the top tier for me, and that is Big Brother 17. In Big Brother 17, I mean, you start off with the Vanessa backdoor, and she ends up surviving it, which is really great TV. You later have some of these interesting rounds where Steve and Johnny Mac have the side between Meg and Julia, and that's a pretty interesting round there. You then have Vanessa finally flipping against the Oz twins and convinces Julia to go after Austin, and that's really good. You then have the eventual Austin boot week, which is an all-time great round of gameplay there, and his eviction is one of the most satisfying downfalls in the history of the show. And we obviously have the Vanessa eviction at the final 3, which is a really great moment as well. So again, like, it's a pretty strong post jury. The problem is that lull in the middle. Again, there is this 3-round stretch of gameplay that is just not that interesting. We start off with the Jackie double eviction, which was very ho-hum there, and we followed that with 2 really boring rounds of gameplay where Jackie goes home, where that was pretty foreshown, and then we have an even worse one where Johnny Mac goes home, only to then proceed to come back immediately afterwards. And even then, we can take into account the James double eviction, which was also not that interesting. So again, like, it is a pretty boring middle stretch there, but the end game is really strong, and the very beginning of the post jury is strong, which is what leaves it here at number 8. Now number 7, and here we're starting to get into the good host juries to me, but here we're starting it off with a couple seasons that do have a bit of a negative air surrounding it still, but at number 7 we do have Big Brother 21. And BB21, again, like, is a season that is pretty known for its very dynamic gameplay in its endgame stretch, and yeah, that is why it's this high. Again, we do start off with the Jessica HOH, where she nominates Jack and Jackson, and that's a really big moment for the season. The following week was an interesting one as well, where Christy was nominated due to a twist and could have potentially gone home there, though obviously gets saved, and through that we do lose one of the underdogs and Kat, but then we follow that up with Taco Tuesday, and that leads to Christy saving herself once again there, this time over Annalise. Now I will say after that, I do think the gameplay slows down a bit. Again, the Nick eviction's not that interesting, and then we get the Jessica eviction, which is like kind of interesting in the sense that they're taking out Jessica, who seems like a non-threat, but even then that was perpetuated by Tommy saving Christy once again. Again, the Christy double eviction's not particularly interesting, but we do get a very strong final 5 round, probably one of the best final 5 rounds in the history of the show, where again this debate over whether or not to keep Tommy ends up leading to some really great stuff there, and also like Mickey's lie and like all that stuff. Again, like a lot of great stuff in that final 5 round, and the endgame stretch ends up just being a steamroll by Jackson. But again, like, I do feel like there are massive highs. Again, that final 5 round, Jack eviction round, you have the Annalise eviction round. Those are all-time great rounds of gameplay. Everything else is just more so fine. But again, for me, it's enough to put it this high. I will say the one thing that is also negative for this is, again, like, this is a mostly unlikable group of people. And considering Jackson ends up winning the season, that means one of the unlikable people does end up winning it and doesn't get a comeuppance. But I mean, he kind of does also through the reunion part of the show. But either way, again, like, I think, like, at the end of the day, BB21 is a solid post jury, but not quite at the pinnacle of this list. So it's here number 7. At number 6, similar thing. We're at BB15. And BB15 for me, like, again, has a lot of dynamic gameplay in its post jury, but again, there's still the issues of a lot of unlikable people and also just some icky things happening. And I mean, we started off with the Candace eviction week, which that is a pretty bad week. I mean, that is definitely something that knocks this down a bit. But following that, again, we get the Judd double eviction, one of the best double evictions in the history of the show. And sadly, it's followed up by the Jesse week, which is another kind of boring week. But following that, it really is pretty strong from that point forward. Where at that point, we do have the Helen eviction week, where Andy flips against Helen and Alyssa, We follow that up by Aaron's eviction week, where Alyssa wins HOH and initially targets Amanda, but wants to backdoor her for some reason. And Amanda ends up winning the veto to save both her and McCraig, and that's a pretty good moment. You then obviously have the Amanda eviction itself, which is just incredible. Like, such a massive downfall for her as a character, which was great to see. And then we also get the Alyssa double eviction, which was, again, really great to see. The Exterminators really run circles around Alyssa in that position. Now, I will say that the endgame stretch is not as interesting, where from the final 5 on, it's really just Andy running the show. But again, the middle stretch there is really, really strong, where really from the Judd eviction up until the Alyssa eviction, with the exception of the Jesse week, is all-time great Big Brother there. It's just surrounded by, again, some stagnation at the end, and then a very icky first week that leaves it behind the other seasons here at number 6. Now, number 5, we're moving on to another really dynamic post-jury, and one that doesn't have this air of ickiness surrounding it, though it definitely does feel a bit longer than the other ones, which is why it's kind of in the same ballpark for me. And at number 5, I do have BB18. And BB18 ends up having some solid weeks here. Again, you got the Davon week, which was just fine. But that's followed up by 2 great weeks back-to-back in the Zakia eviction, where we see Paulie's game completely crumble after him seeming to be poised to run the entire game. And while we do get a bit of a lull in double eviction, it does pick back up where Paulie gets taken out immediately afterwards, which these 2 weeks, the fall of Paulie here ends up being a major highlight of the season for me. But then we follow that up with another pretty interesting round where we get Victor's second eviction, which I think is probably a forgotten round nowadays, but I think is one that, like, again, was so much fun at the time to see Nicole throw Paul and Victor under the bus to get Natalie to put them up. And while Paul wins the veto, like, they really end up campaigning for Victor and create these, like, massive schemes to try to keep him the entire way. To which we did come into eviction night not really knowing who was going home, and again, that was a lot of fun at the time. And we follow that up with Victor coming back into the game, and then fully aligning with Nicole and Corey to where they flip the game against James and Nally by taking out Big Meech. And at that point, we're in an endgame scenario where we have 3 pairs of 2, and that was really interesting to see them navigate through. So again, like, I feel like as a whole, this is a pretty good post-jury phase. I think the problem is that one, again, goes on for way too long. But even beyond that, again, like, the final 5, final 6 rounds can feel a bit predictable. As a whole, again, I do think it is a solid post-jury of the show, again, in line with BB's 15 and 21, though without the complete negativity surrounding it. So because of that, for me, it's here number 5. Now, number 4, we have 2 post-juries here back to back that are pretty similar in my eyes. I do think these games play out in a pretty similar light. I think this one has a bit more stagnation towards the end. But at number 4, I do have BB13. And BB13 is a pretty good post-jury at the very beginning. Again, we do have Brendan coming back into the game, only then to be sent out once again. And we follow that with Danielle being taken out by Jeff, only for Jeff to then be taken out by Kalia and Portia after Shelly flips on him immediately afterwards. And all that is really great. Again, this is a great stretch of gameplay where essentially the 3 biggest threats in the game go out back to back to back. And we follow that up with the Pandora's Box round, which is obviously, like, very wonky from a game perspective, but I do think it made for more entertaining TV. To see this comeuppance for Shelly, with her game now being in the hands of Jordan and Rachel. And also along this week, we do see Jordan getting into fights with Shelly, which, again, all that was really strong. I think the first 4 weeks of this endgame stretch were really, really good, though it does, again, a little bit slow down afterwards. But again, that's really just the nature of endgames in most situations, where final 5 round, again, Kalia was more likely to boot there. Final 4 round, we do get a bit of intrigue from Portia voting out Jordan instead of Rachel, though for her obviously made sense. And then we have Rachel winning at the very end, which is, again, a very satisfying conclusion to the season to me. So again, I feel like it's a post-jury that starts off very, very strong, where the big targets are taking each other out left and right. Again, the double eviction where Jeff goes home is an all-time great one. And we really do get these satisfying downfalls for the likes of Danielle and Jeff and Shelly all in a row. I do think for Rachel to be the one to come out of all that and end up winning the game is also a satisfying conclusion. So because of that, for me, it's here number 4. At number 3, we're moving on to, again, a post-jury I do look at pretty similarly, where it's another one where all the big threats take each other out. And here at number 3, we do have Big Brother 11. And this is another one where we start off with the bang, though, again, one that is perpetuated by a twist. But again, that doesn't stop the fact that it makes for good TV, where Jesse gets taken out due to a coup d'etat. But even before that happened, it was still a really good week, where we had Shima targeting Russell and them getting into arguments. And that just ends up being a really, really strong week. And following that, we have Shima's quit, which is a great moment, followed by Lydia really losing her mind by the time she ends up leaving the house and causing a lot of drama. But after that, we have Jeff flipping on Russell and taking him out, to which we get a lot of arguing between him and Russell on the way out, only for Kevin to then flip the game on Jeff by taking him out in the following round. And all that is really, really strong. Again, these big threats taking each other out. Again, you got Jesse, you got Russell, you got Jeff. And while I personally would have been more satisfied to see Kevin Campbell end up winning the season, I do think Jordan winning the season is still a somewhat satisfying outcome, considering the fact that she was this big underdog for a lot of the season, and she does end up winning that final HOH to get herself to the end. And overall, I think this is a pretty strong post-jury phase. Again, a really, really strong first 4 rounds of it. And even at the final 4, even though, again, not the most riveting thing in the world, where Michelle seemed like an obvious boot, you still have Natalie getting HOH-itis at Final 4 and her coming out with ridiculous schemes and lying about Pandora's box and all that's really dumb too. So again, it's not a bad week there either. So because of that, for me, again, BB11 towards the top here at number 3. Now number 2, and the top 2 here for me were pretty definitive. And what do you know? They both revolve around the same person, which might be a major reason why they're both towards the top. But at number 2, I do have what I would consider the best season of BBUS, and that is Big Brother 10. And again, watching Dan maneuver through the endgame here is just really great TV. Big Brother 10 is a season that I think its peak was in the pre-jury. Again, I think that Jesse eviction week was the best week of the entire show, but it's still not bad following that. Again, the first week of the post-jury here does revolve around the repercussions of that round, where here we do have Libra going out, and here we still get some pretty massive fights between Libra and Keisha and Jerry and Michelle and April. And there's a lot of great stuff there. The April round is a bit more mundane, but eventually you get to the Michelle Costa boot round, which was just really incredible TV. Again, another all-time great week of the show, where Dan has HOH and makes this deal with Ollie that he doesn't hold true to, and then has replacement nominee roulettes, and that's really fun TV. And it's all the lead up to a double eviction where Ollie gets taken out immediately after that is really funny. And again, we get a really fun endgame stretch where the Renegades really just run circles around everyone, where we do see Memphis convincing Jerry to not put him up, to where Memphis is able to win veto and take Dan off at the final 5. We then have Dan getting Memphis to vote out Keisha, and that ends up being a pretty explosive exit from the game. And again, a lot of this is just fun due to watching Dan navigate through the game, who is this player that, again, is a really strong player, but also knows how to make good TV. So again, considering the strength of both the Libra and the Michelle Costa boot rounds, and also how the end game was still pretty dynamic, BB10 here ends up being here number 2. Now number 1, the best post-jury in the history of Big Brother US to me was not that close. At number 1, I do have BB14. And really just straight up, this is just an incredible series of events here, largely revolving around Dan. Again, a lot of this is because Dan is facing so much adversity across this point in the game, is still overcoming all that to somehow still get to the final 2 to where he loses. But again, the jury phase here does start with a double eviction, which ends up being a pretty fun one, where Frank is the target, but Frank wins veto, to which Ashley ends up being taken out as really just collateral damage. But this is a position where Ian ends up turning on Frank more openly. Again, that's really fun. We then have Frank winning HOH immediately after that and targeting Dan, and this is obviously where we get Dan's funeral, which all that is incredible TV. Again, blindsiding Brittany, pretending to work with Frank, only then the following week blindside Frank himself, in a position where both he could have saved him with the veto, and also was pretty much the sole decider on whether or not he stayed. And again, that's a pretty great blindside there. And we follow that with a really incredible double eviction, where Dan wins HOH and wants to target Ian, but Ian wins the veto, and then he wants to target Shane, but Danielle tells him not to. So the last second he takes out Joe, and all that is really strong. Now the final 5 round is not as interesting, where we do have a sliver of intrigue from, again, there was a chance that Dan would have taken out Shane, though Shane obviously wins the veto. So at the end of the day, Jen just ends up going home pretty easily there. But again, we get the final 4 round, which is another iconic moment of Dan blindsiding Shane and Danielle along the way. Again, insane moment there. And even at the final 3, again, usually final 3s are really boring. There's nothing going on. But Dan is still playing the game at that point. He's getting Danielle to pick fights with Ian through that final week, and is also able to get both Ian and Danielle to throw the HOH to him. Again, all that is really insane. Again, there's so much strong content in the back half of this season, and a lot of it stems from Dan playing from the bottom and persevering through that. And I think the fact that he did play this like really cutthroat game and does lose the game at the end to a bitter jury does actually probably better the season as well. To where, while yes, from a gameplay perspective, I would have wanted Dan to win over Ian, I do think from a narrative perspective, I do think it is a more satisfying conclusion to see Dan lose here and to see Ian, who is portrayed as this big hero for the show, to end up winning. So again, like at the end of the day, I do think this post jury is pretty near perfect. I think outside the final 5 round, even then it's not even that bad. I do think every round of the game is really, really strong, and because of that, for me, this ends up becoming the best post jury in the history of Big Brother US. But there we go. I mean, that is my ranking of every post jury. Now, again, moving forward, I'll still continue to do rankings like this for Survivor and Big Brother. I would like to do something like this for BB Can at some point down the road as well. I think that would be fun. Obviously, just stay tuned for more of the same content down the road. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.